It's not a super brilliant tactical game compared to the final game that we're gonna talk a little bit later on. The game was Arena Cruise that I played in this Olympiad. It's uh, absolutely opposite of it. And what's more surprising, I didn't open this game with my favorite e2 to e4 move. You wouldn't believe it. But I played knight to f3. I started the game with knight to f3. Why? Well, that's a difficult question. It's hard to um, explain, but somehow probably you can call it intuition. For some reason, I thought that it's more important to surprise my opponent, even though she's the world champion. But it's a rapid game, and there are more chances she was getting ready for e4, obviously, and that means that after knight f3, she will be surprised. She will require more time to choose the system and the line she would go to. And as the result shows, I was right. Okay, but of course, it was not because of the opening that I won this game. I played knight f3, so it's ready opening, but we quite soon transposed to the Grunfeld setup, the symmetrical Grunfeld, so it's totally symmetrical for the moment, after castle especially. But white has half a move, right? So they are trying to use this half a move and be a little bit more aggressive. c4. This is a very known position. There are several approaches for black. The most popular move, I think, here is c6. And there is a huge theory after this move. But my opponent played d takes c4. Actually, to tell you the truth, after analyzing these positions for quite a long time, I think that's the most direct approach for black to fight for equality. Knight a3. I am not giving away this pawn. I want to win it back. But, of course, black does not want to let my knight just take on c4 and play c5. That's basically black's main idea, to counterattack and try to exchange all the pawns in the center. And since the position is quite symmetrical, they think that it's going to be easier to fight for a draw. But again, this half move advantage gives white a small edge in some lines. Knight takes c4 is one of the main continuations here for white, but in this game I decided to take on c5. My opponent thought for some time and reacted very well. She played c3. That's one of the important ideas here in this setup. So she's ready to lose this pawn. Since I was going to take it anyway, but she's trying to worsen my pawn structure on the queen side. I played knight to b5. And here she took on b2. There was a game between Jordan Van Forest and Anish Giri in one of the Magnus Carlsen invitationals this year, actually March this year, and Anish played knight a6. And after knight takes c3, knight takes c5, they played for quite a while, but the game ended in a draw. And probably that is the most precise way for black to fight for a draw. Of course, taking on b2 is not a mistake, but it helps me. It helps developing my bishop to a very nice diagonal, to the long diagonal, bishop d7, a4. But to tell you the truth, the game is round equal. Okay, we have a little bit difference now. It's not symmetrical, right? My pawns are on the a and c file, and black's pawns are on the a and b files. At some point, it's like better. These pawns are better placed than my pawns, but At the same time, the b file is open, and I can try to use it to attack the b7 pawn. That's my main plan. I played knight e5, exchanging pieces and opening up my way to this b7 pawn. Knight takes e5, bishop takes e5, bishop c6, offering to exchange the bishops, again making the pawn structure almost symmetrical. But I decided to keep the b file open for the moment. So exchanging one more pair of pieces, and I mean, the game is about equal. And I think one of the smallest mistakes that Black made here is this move that they tried to exchange the bishops with the move knight e8, but it let me go to the 7th rank. I think just playing queen to e6 and holding this position for a while would have been a better idea. But again, knight e8 is not a mistake in any sense. The position still remains equal, and what I like about this game is that all the moves that both sides made, they were the best moves in the position for a long time. So the position remained equal quite long. No tactics at all here. It's more about getting small positional advantages. And yes, exchanges is a huge part of a chess game, and what pieces to exchange and what to leave on the board is a very difficult question. But so you see that after knight e8, I changed my way, so my rook suddenly from the c file went back to d file because the knight went to e8, thus leaving this d7 square unprotected. And here, after queen c6, I managed to prepare this road to my rook, the 7th rank, the favorite for any rook. After rook takes e6, suddenly I have this knight takes a7 move, and then rook goes to d7. And if black takes, I can give a check. And you see, the knight on g7 is not ideally placed. And, well, it's always very close, but now I have an extra pawn, and my second rook will get to the 7th rank, so some advantage here. And after rook takes e5, it still may be a draw. Actually, after rook takes e6, I was going to play rook to d7. And I think that's stronger than this firework. Oops, sorry, this firework with knight takes a7, and it might still be holdable. I'm pretty sure it is actually, but black faces some unpleasant moments. In the game, my opponent took with the pawn knight d4, but this pawn on c6 requires attention, and I have an open file, 2 open files right now to use, because if black plays rook b8, it doesn't really help her win this fight for the file, because I'm just in time. I am threatening to take on b8 and then on c6, and black is kind of obliged to take on b1, but then I'm going to get to b7. So my opponent tried to improve the position of her king, to prepare e5, to prepare knight e6, and that's the right plan. I at the same time tried to get to b7, rook c7, protecting the 7th rank, f4. I'm protecting the pawn on the square on e5 to have this, to meet e5 with this exchange, and creating one more weakness for black. That's why they don't play e5 straight away. They played knight f7, and here I improved my position a little bit more. How can I improve it? I played a5. I found a very nice plan with putting my pawn on a6 and preparing rook to b7. Rook d8. Counterplay on the d file, absolutely correct way to handle this position. What black is ready to win the knight actually, so I need to be careful. And that's why I played rook to d3. The rook on d3 is protected by the pawn, so after rook to d7 I have knight takes e6, knight takes e6, and this pawn will decide the game. Rook d5, a6, rook takes e5. So I found this interesting pawn sacrifice. I played rook b7, and of course I was very happy about this position because not only I'm the one who forces black to solve very difficult questions, but at the same time my opponent was starting to run very long time. She had already, let me check, she had already, how many minutes she had at this point? When I played rook to b7, I had 5 minutes 45 seconds, while my opponent had only 2 minutes. And of course, this time difference in a rapid game, well, I think decided the game. Because after knight e8, I played rook e3, threatening to play knight e6. And, well, unfortunately for my opponent, she didn't find the correct way. There was the only move to hold the equality. The position is still equal. It's holdable. There is no way for white to win if black plays correctly, but at the same time, again, it's the only way here for black. And alas, my opponent didn't find it. She played knight c4. This move loses the game. She was supposed to play e5. That's a very difficult move. Psychologically, it's quite difficult because this pin is very unpleasant. Now, after f takes e5, rook takes e5 loses, for example, because I use this pin. I win back the pawn, and then I'm gonna grab the pawn on a7 and promote my pawn on a6. So black needs to take on e5 with the pawn, and then, well, I cannot really create any threats. I mean, I have many nice ideas. For example, rook f3 and rook f8 looks how beautiful it is. I mean, trying to invite black to take on f8, and then it seems that, well, I'm still kind of making believe that I'm the one who's playing for a win. But at the same time, it does look pretty nice, but it doesn't win the game, unfortunately. There are several ways for black to react on this beauty, and unfortunately for me, it's not enough. I can try to improve my position somehow, but again, all those fireworks lead only to a drawish endgame. Of course, it would still require black to make some precise moves, but according to the computer, the position is equal. Happily for me, my opponent, as I said, was running low on time. She didn't find the correct way, and she played rook c4. Basically, it is the only big mistake in this game. We can even say it's the only mistake in the game, and one mistake in this particular game was enough to lose it. I played knight e6, forcing black to take on b7, because otherwise I'm gonna take on a7, and my pawn on b7 is just too strong. There is no way to... Well, I'm just in time, because knight d8 is not just protecting the pawn, but it's a check at the same time. Black needs to move away, and I have time to go to a3, to take on a7, and to protect the pawn on b7. And if black plays king e8, unfortunately, again, she's not in time because the king gets under check. She doesn't have time to take on b7 because I win the rook. And after king to g7, this is a position from my preview, probably you noticed. I did not find the... I mean, I was thinking here, I was choosing between two lines, between rook a8 and this endgame. So I have like an extra exchange, but black has a pawn for this exchange, and I was not sure how won this position is. And I was also thinking that knight takes e6 is a possibility because it brings me to this endgame with 4 versus 3 on one wing, although I think here there are more chances to make a draw compared to this position for black. But I looked even further down, and I managed to find one more move, which I think is even better than rook a8. The idea is that black is not threatening anything. For the moment, there are no threats to this pawn. So, and I always have this rook a8, right? Or knight c6. So I can try to improve my position. And I found this e4 move. E4 move came into my mind, and yes, look, there is no way black can take on e4 because the rook guards the b pawn. And if she takes with the knight, I have time either to play rook a8 or knight c6, winning the rook. And if she plays rook b2, okay, here I was a little bit afraid to go to f3. I was not sure what's better. I played king f1, but it leads to the same story. I just bring my king closer. And e5, of course, is a threat. e5 is a threat, and black cannot play e5 herself because I promote my queen with the check. And thus the position is completely hopeless. And I managed to play e5. I managed to win a piece, but somehow, since the pressure was high, the stakes were high, and this was a very important game for this match, we were losing 1-0 at this point, I think, with like 3 draws on other boards and with 2 games still in progress, so I did not really know what we are doing on the last board. And I needed to win. Somehow it took quite a lot of time to win. There were several ways to win easier. Of course, the position is completely winning, but you know, the most difficult thing is to win in one position. And here, for example, knight f8, I missed completely this checkmating pattern. That was one of the ways to finish the game immediately. Instead, I played e6. Okay, I brought the king closer. Again, here I'm almost checkmating my opponent, but somehow I couldn't find it. And here I was already worried because I needed to calculate these lines. And to make sure that my king is in the square of this passed pawn, because otherwise it's gonna be a draw. But luckily, yes, I made sure I recalculated several times because I could not believe that it's in somehow optical illusion. At first, I was afraid that I'm out of the square, but I'm just in time. And finally, I managed to promote my pawn into a queen. And even though she promoted her pawn as well with the check, but it's almost impossible to give perpetual on an empty board, especially when I have an extra rook. And a few more checks, and a few more checks, a few more accurate moves, and yes, there are always many checks when there are queens present on the board, but okay, I managed to get my king in front of my opponent's king, and thus one more check will lead to losing her queen. Well, that's it for this game. I think it's a very nice positional game with no fireworks, but it just shows that sometimes one does not really require any sacrifices or any fireworks to win a chess game, and sometimes just a small advantage is enough to put your opponent under huge pressure and make him or her make mistakes. And yeah, I like this game very much. That was the first game of our semifinal match against China. I'm going to continue for my stream to explain what happened later on in the second game of the semifinal, but for YouTube, for my game of the week, this is a cut, this is it, and I hope that you enjoyed this game.